going to be talking today about incident simulations. These are something that a lot of companies tend to ask me about because they want to run one, but they just have no idea where to start. Or sometimes they don't even know why they want to do it. They just feel like it's something that they should be doing. But first, quick intro. I'm Ashley. Hi. I'm from Canada. I had kind of a weird, unconventional path into incident response work that actually started when I was working at Disney. And I took this informal role as the person who was managing guest complaints and customer escalations. And whenever somebody was really mad at Disney, which, believe it or not, does actually happen, I was the person they would end up talking to. And it was my job to turn it around and make it magical again. And the weird thing is I actually really liked it. It was really fun. And I liked talking to people. I liked fixing things that were broken. You also kind of get the tea, like you get to see all the juicy stuff that goes wrong, which is kind of fun about incident response. And that led me to become a founding member of Shopify's incident response team. And this was back in 2016 when not a lot of companies were really hiring or creating this type of role specifically. It was kind of an experiment at the time. And what my job was in that role was really to take what was going on the SRE side of things in a very technically complex platform, the largest Rails monolith that actually exists and is maintained, and take what's going on and connect the dots between that and our customers and our stakeholders and our customers, because if you don't know Shopify, it's an e-commerce platform where people can run online stores. So the audience is really massive, and we weren't really communicating when things went wrong. So that was basically my job, to build some processes and systems so that our SREs didn't have like the comms team in incident room being like, what's a Kafka? And could actually do their jobs. So I would protect them from all of that by connecting those dots. And the experiment worked. And I actually went on to create and lead incident communications as its own discipline at Shopify with its own team, which was great because that saved me from my 24/7 never-ending on-call rotation of just me. And I had a great run doing that. And after 7 years, I got laid off. Shout out to everybody in this room who has been laid off in the past year. And I ended up joining Fluently. They reached out to me with a really cool opportunity for this role where I basically just get to talk about incident response and help other companies figure out their incident response processes. So it's kind of a perfect match for me. This next slide is going to be kind of a jump scare because I underestimated how big this screen was. So if you're not awake, wake up. This is my dog. I just thought we all could use a dog photo. And now I know that you're looking at the screen, so I can bait and switch you by talking about incident simulations again. Wow, look at him. His big moment on the big screen. So proud. So back to simulations. Quick level set. What do I mean when I say simulation? Because there's a lot of different words for this. You might have heard them called game days. If you do the security side of things, red teaming, tabletops, there's a million different words. I'm kind of using simulation as like a blanket term for creating a fake incident that's practice for the real thing. And in this talk, I'm going to take you through all the steps involved in doing that, from the initial planning all the way to the end where you're taking what you've learned and you're implementing them to improve in your organization. But every organization looks really different. So you'll see there's going to be some things I can't really figure out for you, and some things you'll need to tailor to your own company. Why would we do this? Are fake or real incidents not bad enough that we need to create fake ones too? I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to tell you why. When we learn through experience. And I think about this a little bit like riding a bike. You could read all about the mechanics of a bicycle, and you could understand that, you hold the handlebars and you pedal with your feet and you steer, and you could know a bike inside and out, but until you've gotten on one and ridden one, that first ride's still going to be really wobbly. Or you might be like, oh, riding in sand, that looks fun, and then you realize that didn't work at all. So incident simulations are all about creating a controlled environment that is a safe place to learn and fail. Because one of the biggest challenges with incident response work is that there's not a lot of safety to fail. Like Mandy touched on in her talk, when we botch an incident, we feel the pain. It costs money, it can damage your reputation, it sucks for customers, and it kind of just sucks for everybody. So getting that practice in a simulated environment is a really good way to build confidence before you're in the real thing. And that brings us to our first lesson, which is that your goal in an incident simulation is essentially to fail. This is a practice exercise. So what you're looking for in a well-designed simulation are things like this. Where do things break down? What are those single points of failure or total gaps in process, or even worse than gaps in process, bad process? Where does communication break down? Where do people disagree or get slowed down unnecessarily? You want to design a scenario that's going to expose all of this. If you're designing a simulation that you simply just breeze through and pat yourself on the back at the end of, that's kind of just a waste of time. And I know this sounds kind of terrible from a participant point of view, but it doesn't have to be. Because you're going to set the right tone before you go into it. You want to make sure that people know the purpose of this exercise, that this is a learning experience. It's not a test. So I'm going to give some tips on how I go about setting the right tone before a simulation so that people actually look forward to it. Here we go. Number 1, a simulation is not a performance exercise. Can you think of anything worse than trying to respond to an incident in front of everybody, knowing that you're being judged on every move you make? That sounds really terrible. But it's natural that people are going to feel that way going into something like this. Of course, people are going to be nervous. Their peers are around. They're doing something challenging. So you want to be really open about the fact that there are no consequences for making a mistake. This is a simulated environment, and we're all here to learn. It's not a pass or fail. And with that, I don't recommend the whole fire drill tricking people into participating in a simulation by not telling them that it's fake. Mainly, it's just not necessary. People are generally engaged and want to learn through an experience like this, and tricking them into it tends to just kind of confuse people and erode trust. You just don't need to do it. That said, you still want it to feel real. You want to create an environment where people can really immerse themselves, and even though they know it's a simulation, they can kind of forget about it and respond as if it were a real incident. This is also a really good way to make sure that the things you're catching are actually the problems you would encounter in an incident, because a lot of the challenges come in the in-between, in the little nuanced processes that we don't think about when we're just looking at hypotheticals. Next tip, don't stop the clock. So what I mean by that is during the simulation, encourage people to use their judgment and respond accordingly instead of constantly kind of second guessing or saying, I'm confused about this part. Like, does this mean this? Like, just kind of guess and keep it going as if it were a real incident. And if somebody really needs to step outside or really needs to borrow a facilitator because maybe like your sandbox environment's just not working, of course, a facilitator is going to need to step in and keep things running smoothly, but you want to avoid a sort of start-stop and just fully act as though you were in an incident. And with that, this is something I actually see a lot where people, it's kind of meta, like people start dissecting the simulation during the simulation and all of the ways they could have simulated it better. That just is kind of a distraction and derails things. So I would say save all of that for after the simulation is complete, and make sure folks know a retrospective will be happening afterwards, so they'll be given the opportunity to talk about that. But for now, just stay in character. This tip's kind of optional, but I've done it before and it's really fun. This sort of thing's kind of intimidating. Incident response work is scary, and simulations are a part of that, and why not make it a little fun and introduce a little levity where we can? So I've done everything from sending out a gift box of relaxing scented candles and tea to wind down, or just let people expense lunch. Do something. Okay, so we've established why we are doing a simulation and we're going into it for the right reasons, but we need an actual scenario to base the simulation off of. So let's talk about how we can construct that. I don't recommend just digging through your repos and recycling an incident that already happened. Even if the people participating weren't a part of that incident, hopefully, if you're running retros and learning from your incidents, what you've learned there has already kind of been encoded into your company's incident processes. So you want to try to find something that has an element of novelty. You can actually do a brainstorming exercise for this. I find that to be pretty effective. I would just call it the what could go wrong. And I would round up some folks from different parts of the product and just kind of ask them, like, what's the thing that makes you wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it going down? Or what do we have no backup plan for? What tools do we rely way too heavily on? And you can just come up with a ton of different ideas of what ifs and base your simulation around one of those. That said, don't go like nuclear crisis mode. That is just not really the point of testing an on-call team. Realistically, when you get to a certain level, that's an executive team thing. And there are actually firms that specialize in running like crisis exercises for executives. So if you think your company would benefit from something like that, I would say bring in an objective third party to do that. But today we're talking about regular incidents, things your on-call teams are going to respond to. So the sweet spot tends to be like mid to high severity. Think the type of thing that'll happen once or twice a year. Work in some curveballs. And what I mean by that is keep the scenario dynamic. So I think of it a little bit like a choose your own adventure or like a game of D&D if you're as nerdy as I am. Have some ideas in the back pocket that you can throw in if maybe things are moving too smoothly and you want to create a little chaos. You could do a report that has some bad data in it. See if the team catches it or how many decisions they make using it. Or maybe one of your responders has a sudden emergency and needs to drop out. How quickly do you find a backup? Keep the timing in mind. So for a simulation, you'll probably want to time box it. So say you're doing a 90-minute simulation. Don't pick a scenario that will obviously take like days of manual recovery, because then you're going to have no idea how close your response time was to your actual time to resolution. So you miss a learning opportunity there. And with that, going into it, define what done would look like, what a true resolution would be in this scenario, in case the team feels they get there before the time runs out. Okay. So like I said, every company is different, and what incidents look like is going to be totally different depending on your product. But hopefully that gets you thinking in the right direction. Next up, you're going to need some people to actually participate in the simulation. I recommend having a facilitator. This can be the person planning the simulation, or it can be somebody else that you bring in, but they're responsible for making sure everything runs smoothly from start to finish. So everything from holding a welcome meeting to the participants when they first get there to make sure everyone knows what's going on and has their questions answered, so you don't just have a bunch of confused people in a Slack channel like, what are we doing? And then ensuring that things run smoothly, looking out for catches or places where the simulation maybe has some kinks to work out that they can help smooth things along. They're also available on the side for any questions from participants who might get a little bit lost. Next, your responders. So these are the actual on-call kind of teams that are going to be responding to the incident. You're going to want to identify a responder for every role that would typically be included in the type of incident you're running. And what I do not recommend is picking your rockstar SRE, picking the comms person who's been there for 8 years and knows the company inside out. Don't default to those strongest responders. Chances are they are single points of failure in your organization, and having all of them on call is a best case scenario. So look for folks who would benefit from this type of practice. Ideally, you can work with leads from different teams to help identify, who's new to the on-call rotation, who is feeling really nervous about incidents and would want to practice in a safe and controlled environment. Your observers. This is where that A team comes in. So the people who are your strongest incident responders hold a lot of context and knowledge that might not be otherwise documented, because a lot of companies don't really document their incident response process as well, or they just live in playbooks that never get looked at anyways. So what your observers will do is watch how the simulation plays out, and they'll use their context to identify opportunities to improve things. They are silent observers. They're not there to bail people out or give away the answers. They'll be aside, noting those opportunities for improvement and making sure that what comes out of the simulation actually makes sense for your company's, perspective on incident response and their priorities. It's helpful to have a scribe, have somebody to write things down so that when you get to that retro point, you don't have to rely 100% on memory. The facilitator might be busy and being pulled in a lot of different directions, so having a scribe available is really helpful. They're kind of like the facilitator's right hand. They can take what the observers are discussing and what's going on in the simulation and make sure that there's a full timeline to discuss. All right, so that's your people. So next, we need to actually construct an environment where the simulation is going to take place. Chances are you interact with a lot of different tools during an incident. Everything from your observability, your alerting, where you write docs, where you communicate internally, externally, all these different things in some way are involved in your incident response process. And for every person here from a different company, there's a different tech stack. So I can't take you through every single tool and how exactly to utilize it in a simulation. But a lot of these tools, like I know GitHub, for example, has great documentation on how to create a sandbox kind of clone environment of your repos, different things like that. But you want to map out all of these tools and determine how they will be used in a simulation. What I do recommend is when you are creating sandbox environments, make sure they're clearly marked so people don't get deeply confused. You don't want somebody stumbling across this channel and being like, wait, we have a Sev1 outage? Like, no one told me. Or somebody in the simulation shipping things to production because they got a little bit confused about where they're supposed to be. So just make sure everything is really clearly marked and documented. And then we have the viewing room. So this is where those observers are hanging out during the simulation. They're in a meeting together where they're observing and discussing how things are going using their context. The scribe's in there noting things down so that all of that is documented, and during the retro, they can reflect on what they saw as experts in the process. So it's a lot of planning. This is the type of thing you can do, like, I used to do them once a year. So I know it sounds like a lot, but I'm not saying do this every week. But what happens when you get to the big day where you're actually running your simulation? Here's kind of how it goes down. Run of show, if you will. First off, hold a welcome meeting. I recommend just putting everyone in a room together where they can see each other's faces. Maybe they've never even met before. Having people meet for the first time in a live incident is not ideal. You want your response teams to feel connected and understand each other and their work. So facilitating a bit of a welcome meeting just puts everybody at ease, and also make sure that they know what's going on when the simulation starts so that you don't have that 20 minutes of chaos and looking around like, do we start now? What do we do? And then once everybody's on the same page and ready to go, you initiate the simulation. So this can be done by the facilitator, however your company would typically initiate an incident. You can just drop the scenario into a Slack channel as a brief description, or you can get creative and have somebody report the incident via PagerDuty or another tool, whatever you want to do that feels realistic to your team. As the simulation progresses, your observers are watching and noting, and the facilitator's watching as well, making sure that things are progressing. Either the team will come to a resolution or they'll run out of time. Either way, the simulation will end. Give people a break after. It's a lot of work and it's mentally exhausting, so it's really important to run a retro, and we're going to talk about that next, but let people take a few minutes to decompress, and that can be a great time to work in that fun element that we talked about. Maybe you let them buy lunch or something like that. And then you're going to do a retro. This part's not optional. Everyone wants to skip retros, but we're going to do one. If you've done retros before, you might know that there's a billion different formats that you can run them in. Some people like to do the root cause analysis style, postmortem, standard template. Like there's a million different things. I say for something like this, use a really simple template. Mainly because since you time boxed your simulation, you're going to go into the retro after a break right after. People are tired. You don't want to add all this complexity of a really elaborate, the sailboat with the anchor and there's like images and all of this stuff, retro process. It's just like more than you need. But you want to create an opportunity for people to talk about what they have experienced and really dig those learnings out. I like this one, the good, bad, ugly. How it works is you're going to take a doc. It can be like a mural board, Confluence, Google Doc, whatever you want. And you're going to map out 3 sections, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, self-explanatory. It's things that went well. You want to keep doing that. Do it again. You don't really need to change it. Everyone's on the same page. We liked it. The bad, opposite of that. That sucked. We do not want to do that again. How do we eliminate that moving forward? And the ugly, this one's the one that's kind of unexpected. Ugliest things that didn't really go so well, but they've got potential. You could clean them up and turn them into something you would want to use. And if it's worth the investment, you'll do it. For what it's worth, by the way, there's templates for this online. You can just Google good, bad, ugly, retro template, and there's a bunch that will populate for you. So how it works is you'll have your 3 sections and all of the participants will spend some time putting notes in each section and then taking place or participating in a facilitated discussion afterwards where you eventually will surface learnings. Once you've surfaced all of your learnings, we need to turn those into action. And action items will live in the Google Doc forever and no one will ever look at them again and they'll just kind of gather dust in the Google Drive forever. Just kidding. You're going to make a plan to actually do them. So to make sure your action items actually happen, you want to assign an owner. The owner is the person who is responsible for making sure that this actually gets done. They don't have to do it themselves. They can delegate it, they can reassign it, but they're the one that we're going to follow up with and check in on the progress. Each action item should also have a timeline for expected completion. And I would say as a rule of thumb, if an action item is going to take more than 2 weeks, break it down into smaller action items because you're not going to just, you have roadmaps, you've got projects. If you go way too optimistic and pull this giant project out of something like this, it's probably not going to happen without a lot of effort. So look for quick wins, small incremental changes you can make to improve your incident response process. And finally, tracking. Don't leave it in the retro doc. Pull it into Jira or wherever you manage your issues and tickets so that you can actually see the process and the progress. We talked a little bit about this, feedback. The first time you run a simulation, it's probably going to be kind of janky. You'll hit some kinks. That's normal. They need to be tailored for your organization. Everyone does things differently. So just make sure you don't forget to give people an opportunity to give their feedback on the scenario itself and whether or not it was beneficial for them and what they would change moving forward. And I didn't really talk about product at all during this, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it now, but I do have to give a quick shout out to Rootly because they paid for my flight. So Rootly is where I work, and it's a product I really, really love. I spent, like I said, about 7 years on a 24/7 on-call rotation, and I care a lot about making the experience of on-call a lot better for people so that it's sustainable, because it's really interesting work and it's really fun and engaging, but at the same time, it's done in a way that's just really prone to burnout for a lot of people. And I think that should change. So what I love about Rootly is that it's a product that eliminates a lot of that kind of cognitive overhead and exhaustion and challenges for people who are responding to incidents on call by automating a lot of those processes so that you can just stay in Slack and do your job. So it connects all your different tools from alerting, observability, your retro, all of that, and it automates things. So if you're curious about how that works, feel free to come see me and I'm happy to show you around. It's not a sales pitch because I'm not in sales and I don't know how to do a proper pitch, but I can show it to you. Or we can just chat and exchange some incident horror stories because I always like hearing those and I've got some good ones myself. And that's all. Thanks for your time, everybody. Oh, I guess.
Thank you. So first question was, why is the dog called Whiskey?
Why is the dog called Whiskey? So originally I really wanted to get a puppy and my husband didn't want to get a puppy. So I thought, what if we name it something he really likes, like whiskey? And it's kind of like a mind trick because he loves whiskey and that's a cuter name than like golf. So we went with that.
Hi. Do you recommend that the observers know the like under the hood of the simulation, or are they blind like the responders?
I recommend they know. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Sorry. Oh, I don't think the observers necessarily need to know specifically what the scenario is going to be, although they can actually be helpful in that like brainstorming and planning session because they just know incidents so well. So they might have that some insight on like the type of incidents people tend to struggle with most or where those big challenges will be. So I think it's okay if they know that, but not 100% necessary. But they should definitely know that it's a practice exercise. Yeah, so every simulation I've ever done has been remote. So I'd say a lot of that, like the main difference or things to consider is the environment that you're working in. So that's where really mapping out all those different tools is helpful because you're not like in a room together during an incident. You're in a bunch of different tools that may or may not interact with each other. So looking at your environment as kind of your remote environment, like how does Slack play into this? How do we use Google Docs in an incident and all of that, and just using the tools that you would typically use.
What is your view about depth? So, for example, in our organization, we use a variety. Like, for example, on every Friday, we'll do a shallow exercise where only the alert is actually created, and then the rest is D&D dungeon mastered. While every couple of months or every few months, we'll run larger exercises where we affect, for example, QA or some simulated environment.
I think that probably depends on how mature your incident response process is. Like if you have nothing, probably just start simple. Maybe even just start contained with individual teams at first before you put everything together into like a bigger cross-functional exercise. And I did touch a little bit on tabletops, which is more where you're like talking through a hypothetical. That can be a good place to start as well if you've never like done a choreographed kind of incident response before, is to just start talking about what would this look like and how would we build it. And as you start building and implementing processes incrementally, you can deepen those scenarios.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more, real quick.
Sorry. So you mentioned something about the first time you run something, it's going to be janky, and I totally get that. I've worked at organizations where if you run something and it's janky, you never do it again, right? So is there good documentation, training, like training the trainer type of thing? Anything that you can recommend so that we can make the least janky first run around?
That's a really good question. And now I have to say the thing that my boss wanted me to say, which is that if you want to run an incident simulation for the first time, I will help you. You can reach out to me and I will help facilitate or help you build that. So I probably should have put my email. It's just ashley@rootly.com. I'm on LinkedIn and reluctantly on Twitter, kind of, but that's not very reliable for me. So come find me if you want to do this sort of thing and you want some help. I'd be down to do that. I'm sure there are resources online. I just have always kind of gone from scratch, so none are coming off the top of my head.